Some would believe that God does not exist. However, that is against what the evidence says, because we do have evidence that God exists. One of them, or 5 of them in fact, were given by a late medieval philosopher, Saint Thomas Aquinas. He calls them the 5 ways, and today we'll be talking about the first way. The first way is called the argument from motion. It begins with the observation from experience that there is much change or motion. For example, when we see wood getting heated by fire, the wood itself becomes hot, right? Or the kettle, which contains water in it, when applied with heat, the water eventually boils. So that is a clear example of motion. The second point is that whatsoever is moved is always moved by another. There's something else that moves it. For example, the wood cannot heat itself without fire actually heating it, or the water and the kettle, which is getting hot and eventually the water boiling, cannot go on, cannot become hot unless there is something external to it, which is fire. So that is a very clear example of the principle that whatsoever is moved by another. Alright, now, either there is an infinite regress of movers, okay, or there is at least one mover that is not itself moved. There's a disjunction. There are only 2 options. Either all are moved by another, or there's at least one mover that is not moved. Now, there is a problem with saying that all movers are moved. One of them is that all movers would then derive or receive their motion from somewhere else. But that is a problem. Think, for example, of this illustration. You have a mirror facing another mirror. Once you see a face in that mirror, and also a face in another one, and then another face in another mirror when they're facing with each other, you cannot say that there's no real face out there just because there are already images inside the mirrors, right? Once you see the images inside the mirrors, you can immediately conclude that there has to be a real face, right, that is being reflected by those mirrors. That's because all those mirrors only reflect the face through another, okay, through something else, and that is the real mirror. In the same way, if all movers are themselves moved, then all movers derive their motion from another. There's no real something that could give motion to another. So there's no real face. So in other words, there has to be at least one unmoved mover. Alright, we now see that some things are in motion. We see that whatsoever is moved by another. We see that there must be at least one unmoved mover. Now we must discover what features must that unmoved mover have, right? Now, notice that all motion in the world must be received from that unmoved mover. In other words, all actualized potencies in the world must be dependent on the action, the power of that one unmoved mover. But what does that mean? That means that he is the creator and preserver of everything else, right? And what another implication? Because he is unmovable, and if you are material, then you will be movable, because material beings can change from one point to another. Then, since he is unmovable, then he must be spiritual, right? Immaterial. Now, notice also that if you are an intelligent being, then you cannot be only material, because it is matter that restricts you to only having one form. If you are intelligent, you can have 2 forms at the same time. The form that you already possess as a human being, and also the form of that thing that you're thinking about. Now, if that being which you have proven to exist, that unmoved mover, is immaterial, then he can have 2 forms at the same time, because there's no matter to restrict him to only one form. That means he must be intelligent. And another thing, the motions in the world are contingent. They can be they can be changed in. You can have this kind of motion, but you can also have another kind of motion. The very fact that they still occurred, even if they do not have to be that way, that shows that they are not necessary. And that shows that the fact that they occur were freely willed by the cause of their motion. And that means that this unmoved mover must be, first, the creator of everything else. Second, it must be spiritual. Third, it must be intelligent. And third, it must be free. But what do you mean by somebody who is intelligent and free? That's a person, right? So this being is also personal. There are also other features which we can discuss at some point, but what we have seen is that there must exist at least one unmoved mover, who is at the same time God, because those features are the features of God. So the very fact that there's water that's boiling, the very fact that we see mirrors, right? Mirrors that are deriving their image on one real face. All those examples show us eventually that there must exist God. So it is not true that there's no evidence that God exists. And that is the first way of St. Thomas Aquinas, which we call the argument from motion.